Welcome to the second lecture from week 12. This one will focus on Ralph Waldo Emerson and Henry David Thoreau, our Transcendentalist authors. The slideshow begins with a quote from Emerson, which is, "Do not go where the path may lead, go instead where there is no path, and leave a trail." Emerson was indeed a trailblazer. His focus was always upon the new and the original. While a lot of students find Emerson difficult to read and difficult to get into, and I will admit that sometimes his prose is a little bit thick, I think you'll find that a lot of his writing can be very, very inspirational. I'll try to guide you towards some of the best parts of his writing in Nature. I would encourage you to read the biographical information about Emerson before you read Nature, understanding where he comes from and how he became the figure that he became. I think is very important. He is someone who was a searcher, who was a quester, someone who was on a spiritual journey, a philosophical journey, someone who really did have a tragic early life, and that it really did shape who he later became. And I think that's important to understanding who he was and what he wrote about and how he wrote. And I think you'll be more sympathetic maybe to how he wrote and what he wrote about if you understand where he came from. The selection I asked you to read from Emerson is his essay Nature. Some people call it a book, some people call it an essay. It was published alone as a book. The very first line of the book is, "Our age is retrospective. It builds the sepulchres of the fathers. It writes biographies, histories, and criticism." Basically what he's saying there is that the age that he lives in is one that looks to the past. There are new men, new lands, new thoughts, he later says, and we need to look upon the world in a new way. Few adults can see nature. That's one of the ways that he puts it. He says that we should see the world through the eyes of a child, that basically that we've allowed our adult fictions, our adult filters to mask the way that we see the world. The most famous passage in Nature comes fairly on in the essay, and that is the Transcendentalist moment passage, the one that's also referred to as the transparent eyeball passage, and it's on page 1112 in your textbook near the bottom of the page. If we were in class together, I normally would read it aloud and we'd discuss it, but instead I'm actually going to make that part of your quiz. Instead of your normal sort of multiple choice quiz that you have, you're actually going to have a few passages from Emerson and from Thoreau, and you're going to do some essay responses, because really there's not much you can take quiz-wise on Emerson and Thoreau, and that's one of the passages that I'm going to have you read and write a response to. What I'd like you to think about when you read it is this concept of being the center of the universe, but at the same time not being. It's this strange duality of existing and not existing, of being present and not being present, of being part of nature and part of creation, and also being a non-existent observer. It's this destruction of self, and at the same time, self being God. It's this strange duality that Emerson proposes. The work itself is divided up into separate parts. Commodity, of course, nature is looked upon for its usefulness, that it is a medium, a material that we use. It has a practical ministry. Another use of nature is beauty, that its simple beauty is there for us to enlighten us, to inspire us. It's there to inspire us to contemplate. It's also something that can be easy for us to comprehend, and also can allow us to. It's also something that can bring us to greater depths of comprehension and intuition and contemplation. He talks about nature's relationship to language, as words as being signs of natural facts and representing different states of mind. And then he goes on to talk about the poet as the creator of new words, and the poet as being a significant force, as an explainer of nature and as an interpreter of nature. He talks about nature as being a discipline, that nature represents harmony and order, and that it also mirrors ethics and values. He talks about nature as being an ideal, that it is beyond senses and reason and beyond ethics and religion. And there's some interesting passages there about ethics and religion, especially coming from someone who was a former minister. He talks about nature's relationship to the spirit, that nature confronts man with his own divinity. And therein we get some of the basic tenets of Transcendentalism. And then the conclusion wherein he talks about man must become whole and see the world with new eyes, with the eyes of a child. The next thing I had you read was Resistance to Civil Government by Henry David Thoreau. And it's probably a piece that you'd read before, or at least you'd heard about before. It was something that he wrote based on his experience being jailed for refusing to pay his taxes as protest for the Mexican War. This was a war fought to expand the U.S., and in Thoreau's opinion, to create more slave states. Thoreau was very much against slavery. He was an abolitionist, as were all of the Transcendentalists. Some more vocally than others. Thoreau was a very strong abolitionist and supported radical abolitionists like John Brown. I think you'll find when you read it that the ideas in there are quite radical, but not much more radical than those of Thomas Paine, than those of Thomas Jefferson that were excised from the Declaration of Independence. They're written in a way that's very honest and very passionate. I would encourage you to read the biographical information on Henry David Thoreau. He was definitely an interesting character. He died young. He died before he was really acknowledged as the excellent writer that he was. He left behind some very interesting work. Resistance to Civil Government, of course, many other great essays, the book Walden. There's an essay called Walking that I really like that's not in this anthology, but it's one that I usually assign, and I'll probably try to find a copy of it that I can link and put under additional resources because it really is my favorite of all of Thoreau's essays. Just to give you a little background and to walk you through a little bit of Resistance to Civil Government, the Mexican War was a very controversial war. This is before the Civil War, but the Mexican War was a war that threatened to sort of split up the nation before the Civil War because it did spread slavery, and this was something that abolitionists were very much against. This is against the backdrop of things like the Fugitive Slave Act. Henry David Thoreau begins by invoking Jefferson, that government is best which governs least. He's very much against excessive government power. He's very much a libertarian in a lot of ways, but he's a very much also a very liberal libertarian. He's a peace-loving libertarian. He sees the government as oppressive in the way that it forces people to support things that he doesn't want to support, in particular support laws that oppress people. He doesn't want to be part of a government that, for instance, supports slavery. He doesn't want to be part of a government that attacks other countries so that they can expand slavery. And you can imagine why this essay was very, very popular during the Vietnam era. I'm interested in hearing what kind of responses you have to this because it really is a very anti-militaristic, anti-imperialistic essay. And one of the things that I'm going to ask you guys to do for the quiz is to give some written responses to some passages. So I'm really interested in hearing what you guys have to say about this, as well as what goes on the discussion board, because it really is, there are some controversial ideas here that I think it's going to be interesting to see if some discussion comes out of this. So why Emerson and Thoreau? Why do we still read Emerson and Thoreau? Well, first, Emerson was extremely influential in his time. He was the big man of his era. He economically supported people like Nathaniel Hawthorne. Nathaniel Hawthorne lived in one of the houses owned by Ralph Waldo Emerson. He economically supported Henry David Thoreau. He championed Walt Whitman, who we're going to read next, and many others. Thoreau was very influential later. He was an inspiration to Mahatma Gandhi, to Martin Luther King, to civil rights leaders, to the peace movements. Transcendentalism, the movement they were part of, was the first real homegrown literary philosophical movement that America could claim as its own. And really, Emerson and Thoreau were American originals. There were no other figures like them before them.